Hello, welcome back to the Intel with Greg Cosell. I'm Geoff Mosher and Adam Caplan on the Inside the Birds platform. And of course, we are joined by Greg Cosell from NFL Films, and we're going to finish up our look at NFL free agency, our preview of NFL free agency, which is right around the corner. Greg, with you, we've already done a lot of the defense. We've done edge rushers, we've done stack linebackers, we've done defensive backs, which include nickels, corners, and safeties. So we're going to turn the page here and go to offense, and we're going to cover it all in one episode. Quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers. From an Eagles standpoint, obviously they need a backup quarterback, and they'll look at running backs, but really slot number 3 receiver for them is the position that has the most interest. They juggled around Quez Watkins, Julio Jones, Olamide Zaccheaus last year. And this is an interesting area, right? Because they have a new offensive coordinator, Kellen Moore. And in a Kellen Moore offense the last few years, you've seen some production out of a number 3 receiver. Would you think that the Eagles are looking for someone who gives them some vertical ability out of that number 3 slot in a Kellen Moore offense, or just your traditional short area quickness type of yards after the catch slot receiver?
I mean, not to be cliche, Geoff, but I
Mm-hmm.
think they're probably just looking for a good player. I
Hey.
mean, I think that Kellen Moore has dealt with both those kinds of players in his career. So, he can function and be comfortable with both. I mean, you look at someone like, Keenan Allen, who was there last year with the Chargers. He was hurt a bit, but obviously he's used quite a bit in the slot, and he's at the top of his game, a certain kind of slot receiver.
Mm-hmm.
But you can certainly look for speed as well. Um, you know, I think a lot of that, and we're not going to get into this conversation right now, I don't believe, but I think a lot of that will depend on how they see what Jalen Hurts can do in this offense and how they see how he can function. Because Jalen Hurts did not throw the ball well in the middle of the field.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to have to figure that out one way or the other, not only with a slot receiver, but with Dallas Goedert, because, Dallas Goedert, you could argue, is a little bit underutilized given how talented he is.
But
Absolutely.
one of the guys, Greg, we really like is KG Osborne. I mean, I know he's a guy that didn't get a ton of, of targets, but when asked to play more, he did a good job.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on KG Osborne?
Always liked him. He started out at Buffalo, then he finished up his career Buffalo in college, I'm talking,
Yeah.
and then finished his career with a final year at the U. I watched him. I really liked him. I think given what his role has been with the Vikings, he's played well. I mean, obviously they have arguably the best receiver in the game when healthy in Jefferson. But I think that KJ Osborne is I think he's a number 2. He could be a number 2. He's certainly a number 3. So obviously on the Eagles, he'd be a number 3. And I think he'd be a really good 3. And he lines up in the slot. You can line him outside. He's multi-positional. He has great location versatility within your formation. I like KJ Osborne.
Greg, a guy who I think would look great in an Eagles uniform, but because basically he'd probably look great in any uniform you put him in, it would be an embarrassment of riches for the Eagles, and I don't think they're going to spend this kind of money. But I would like your evaluation of Tyler Boyd, who from the Bengals, who will probably be, if not the number 1 slot receiver out on the market, it'll be one of them.
Yes and no, not because of talent. I mean, he's got to be. What's his age?
I
30 in November.
Yeah,
Oh,
I don't think he's as old as it's because he's been around for a while.
It seems like, then
yeah.
I'm wrong. I thought he was a little older than that. Then I'm wrong, and you're right, Geoff. Yeah, Tyler Boyd's really good. Now, don't forget, he did play in an offense the last couple of years that had Chase and Higgins. Now, the Eagles obviously have Brown and Smith, so that kind of they have 2 really good receivers as well. But Tyler Boyd's really good. Tyler Boyd is just one of those guys, in some ways, like Keenan Allen. Not quite as tall, but I mean, both stocky, both work the middle of the field exceptionally well. Boyd has underrated run after catch ability. Tyler Boyd's really, really good. Now, again, slot receivers, Adam, what is the market for slot receivers? He's a top slot receiver and has shown that throughout his career. Is a guy like that going to get a long-term deal at big money?
5 to 7 million to me is kind of what you're looking at there.
Like for a
He's
3-4 year kind of deal?
Yeah, I mean he's an older player at 29, as I said, just turned 30, but he's been so productive.
Yeah.
But Greg, going back to Pitt, did you think, I know it was a long time ago, did you think he'd be a slot guy or an outside player?
Um, he was outside at Pitt. Obviously, he put up huge numbers there. I'd probably have to look back at my notes. I don't remember because he was so productive in college, but obviously found a home in the slot, and that's where he's played. And, my guess is, and I don't have numbers in front of me, that I would bet that 70-80% of his targets, if not more, come out of the slot. I don't think he's really used as an outside receiver in the NFL.
No, in fact, if you go back to earlier in his career, Greg, and then people may forget this, he was a high volume receiver who went over 1,000 yards 2 years in a row
Yeah,
from the slot. They still had AJ Green at the time, but Green would get banged up a lot and he
right.
would become the epicenter of their offense, but always lined up in the slot. I studied him for 5 games when I was doing the scouting academy. And what really stood out to me is he has excellent ability on the deep overs and to make contested catches,
Yep.
to high point the ball between safeties or a linebacker and a safety. And you're talking about 20 or 30 yards downfield. And there were times, I think, even when Andy was there, Andy Dalton would just throw it up and he would go up and get it, which
Well, he's a
normally you
physical
talk
guy,
about that.
too.
He's almost like an outside receiver who body, but can play the inside really well.
Right. And he's very physical and competitive. I mean, he's a swagger guy too. So, I mean,
Yes.
he could get a pretty good deal. I mean, he's a really good slot.
Right. Well, like I said, I think he would look good in any offense, probably too much right now for the Eagles. Let's look at familiarity. Guys who have played in a Kellen Moore scheme. There are two that jump out. Cedric Wilson of the Dolphins and Noah Brown of the Texans both played under Kellen Moore in Dallas.
I Noah Brown has kind of been one of my favorites, because I always thought he was pretty talented. When I say that, you know what I mean. I don't mean he's one of the 5 best receivers in football. Noah Brown was a big time recruit when he went to Ohio State, and it never quite worked out in terms of him being a volume receiver at Ohio State, and obviously came to the NFL. I mean, he's got traits, big time traits. He's big, he can run, he's physical. They used him when Kellen Moore was in Dallas, they used him as a blocker in the run game where he'd motion into the formation, and he was an outstanding blocker. I would imagine Kellen Moore really likes him. Now, again, I'm speaking what I think. I don't know that, but I would think that. And this year, Brown kind of came on because Houston had to use him because of injuries at wide receiver, and he showed up. And he ran a variety of routes. He even ran some, intermediate vertical routes because he can run a bit. And he's a physical kid. I really like Noah Brown. Like I don't know what the market would be for him. He's not. Well, I shouldn't say he's not old. Adam, do you know the age?
Yeah, he just turned 28.
So he's
been
not
on
old.
IR.
Yeah,
it's not too old. He's been on IR a bit, but he also is a good special teams player. But a really good story. He's a former 7th-round pick. And so what happened is Tank Dell got hurt. Dell was doing great. Then he got hurt. He was out for the season. And they weren't ready to play Mechie a lot of snaps. Robert Woods is barely hanging on, and he had to play a lot. And before Noah Brown got hurt, this was like his breakout season. And unfortunately, got curtailed. But no, he's a good story.
Yeah, I really like him, and like I said, I would think that Kellen Moore does. Who was the other player you mentioned, Geoff?
Cedric Wilson.
Cedric Wilson.
Yeah, he was in Dallas as well. Now it's funny. Wilson is a different guy than, let's say, Tyler Boyd. Yes, what kind of slot receiver? Wilson is long, angular. He can line up inside or outside. He did well in Dallas. The year before he got that contract with Miami, he had a really, really good year because they had injuries at receiver in Dallas, and he had a really good season. And I remember him. He's a Boise State guy, if I remember. And I remember watching him in college and thinking, this guy's pretty good. This guy's going to have a chance to be somewhat of a quality receiver in the NFL. And I think he is. After that year in Dallas, I thought wherever he would go, he'd have a chance to be like a maybe even a solid number 2. And it obviously hasn't worked out. You never know the reasons for that. But he's another guy. He's long. He's angular. He can move a little bit. These are nice. The players we're talking about at wide receiver here are pretty interesting players.
Yeah. So here's what happened. Mm-hmm. So they signed him to be their number 2 opposite Waddle, and then 1 week later, Tyreek Hill and the Chiefs couldn't agree to a deal, so the Dolphins got involved. This is never their plan. Their plan, Greg, was to sign Wilson to be the start opposite Waddle, and they traded for Tyreek Hill, and that was it.
So they saw him as a number 2, which I thought,
they did.
That year in Dallas, it looked like that's what he was.
Yep. So it's They're a bunch of number twos or number threes
Yeah.
here. And then one more guy. I know you study, actually two more guys. I know you study Tennessee. I know from talking to the Titans, Nick Westbrook Akine,
Yeah. Yeah.
pretty decent story. I know he's not a speedster, he's a complimentary player, but what are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I mean he's kind of done well there because they've had injuries at wideout. I mean, until they got Hopkins this year, they really didn't have much at wide receiver for a couple of years there. And he always seems to show up. You know, he's been solid for Tennessee. I don't think he's at the level of the guys we're talking about, but I think if you had to play him, you'd be okay. I mean, he's probably more of a true number three. It wouldn't surprise me if some teams saw him as a 4, but he could be a 3. So yeah, he's not quite at the level of the other guys, in my view, anyway.
Yeah, Greg, you brought up a point, I think, when you were talking about Noah, about the ability to block in the run game from a number 3 spot, which, maybe last year just wasn't the same after Zach Pascal left because
Yeah.
Zacchaeus is not as big of a guy. And, look, Kellen Moore is going to want to be in 11 personnel and he's going to want to run. So, last year, Julio Jones, not that guy at his part of the career. And Quez Watkins was never a great
No.
blocker from that position anyway. So you do wonder if there'll be a little bit more emphasis on a guy who can play that inside, play it at 50, 60%, but also give you some good blocking from that
Plus
area.
he did that for Kellen Moore.
Yeah.
So Kellen Moore knows he can do it. I
Yeah.
mean, I can just see in my mind's eye right now the times where he, motioned into the formation and blocked in the run game. I mean, he's that guy.
Right. All right, let's move on to running backs. The Eagles, have DeAndre Swift. He'll be a free agent. We'll see if they're able to bring him back. If not, this is interesting to me. I know it's called a deep running back free agent class, and by name value it is, and skill set it is. I'm not sure that I see, Greg, and you can tell me, among Jacobs, Pollard, Barkley, Eckler. I think these are good running backs, but I don't know if I see a special guy who is deserving of just resetting the market.
Well, obviously,
I know that doesn't always matter because free agent,
no,
we see
and
with Christian
obviously
Kirk, right?
the 2 names that I'll be talking about the most, of course, are Jacobs and Barkley. Personally, and I hope people know that what I say is based on film study. I would not sign Barkley to a big number. I think Barkley is an explosive runner, but not a really good runner, and those are 2 different things. So I would not do that. Now, I don't know if someone will. I mean, Barkley's had injuries. He's again getting older, so I don't know what you think of him. Now, Jacobs, I think, is a really good back. He had the great year 2 years ago, obviously sat out much of training camp, finally came in, again, he's had a lot of volume the last couple of years. His yards per carry this year was way down. I don't think the Raiders had a real strong O-line, but I mean, you start to wonder about guys that have a lot of volume in a short period of time. If you sign them, what do you get? How many years do you get? Obviously, he's going to look at this as maybe his opportunity for a big payday.
Mm-hmm.
Adam, you could speak to this far better than I, but I just don't know if teams are going to dish out that kind of money for, Josh Jacobs. And I love Josh Jacobs, by the way, the way he plays. But I mean, you really going to sign a guy like that for 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, it's with him. He's certainly a 3-down back. I know he's had some injuries. It wasn't the injuries last year. It's just as Greg said, their line was bad. And don't forget the play caller / head coach was fired midseason, and that just derailed their offense.
Right.
With Barkley, what I was told is that from his tape, sometimes was not hitting holes that were there, which is going to frustrate people when they grade his tape. Just didn't have a very good year. We know their line; they don't have a very good offensive line. But the one guy I do want to talk about, and we know he played for Kellen Moore, and he dropped off last season. Is Tony Pollard. What are your thoughts about him?
I like Tony Pollard a lot. The big question is, how do you see him in your offense? Obviously, Kellen Moore is very familiar with him. The question is your volume. I mean, do you see him as a guy that, I don't want to say you build your offense around. The Eagles are not going to build their offense around a back in a strict sense. But the question becomes, what do you see him as? Kellen Moore, I would think, would have a really good feel for what Pollard is, given that he was there. But I like Tony Pollard. He's got some explosion to him. He's a really good receiver. It would strike me, I mean, this is obviously not a profound statement because he played for Moore, that he fits more because Moore had him, So I don't know what the market would bear for Tony Pollard. My guess is no one would see him as the foundation of an offense, or as a guy that, hey, we're going to sign him and we're giving it to him 20 times a game,
Right.
in terms of carries, not touches. So, he could be. I mean, in the eyes of Kellen Moore, I would think that Tony Pollard would be very similar to what Swift was, but Pollard would be better, because Moore knows him, and he would feel more comfortable with him.
Greg, there was talk. Well, when I spoke to some people at the combine, it seemed like the feeling on Barkley is if you could put him in a Shanahan style offense, a wide zone, stretch zone
Right.
type offense, you're probably catering to his skill set better, to your point, because I don't want to say the holes are created for you and vision isn't important. It's always important. But we know with the outside zone, you either get the play side block or the cutback.
Right.
It might be easier for his athleticism to really shine through in that kind of a system, blocking system, and with better offensive linemen. Could you see that being more beneficial for him?
I mean, it's possible. Look, the reality is if Barkley plays a full season and does get 270 carries, he's going to gain 1,200 yards. We know that.
Right.
I mean, a lot of backs, no knock on Barkley, but a lot of backs can do that if they get those kinds of carries. So, I just think Barkley is, I think to myself, visualize Christian McCaffrey, okay? And visualize how he gets more than is blocked.
Right.
Barkley, despite his size, rarely does that. Now, can you put him in a system where it creates more just by the very nature of the holes and the blocking scheme? Sure, you could do that, but I don't think at the end of the day his traits are going to change.
Got it. All right. Austin Eckler, let's go through him about his skill set. It's funny because Austin Eckler and Derrick Henry are obviously two different style of running backs that might be more scheme specific as they hit free agency than other running backs.
Eckler's a really good receiver. I think at this point in his career, you're probably leaning more toward that. I don't know if you can sign Eckler and even give him 150 carries at this point. I'm not,
Wow.
He may be truly a complementary piece, maybe a third down back at this point in his career.
Wow.
That would be my sense from tape. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but that would be my sense watching tape. I'm not sure he can be. Let's use the term primary back as opposed to foundation back. Let's say primary back. I'm not sure he can be that.
Sort of a James White type player, the way he was.
Oh yeah, different body
important.
type but yeah. In some ways, very much like that. That may be the way. To me, he might have to play out his career. And by the way, he may be able to do that for 5 more years.
Yeah, that was an important role in that Patriots offense.
Yeah,
James
he may
White
be able to do that for 5 more years and have a great career and catch 55 balls and maybe he gets 70 carries. But I don't think you can sign him with the idea that he's getting 150 to 180 carries.
A couple things. Remember, they didn't extend his contract. The Chargers made that decision. They redid his incentives, and he does turn 29 in May. But Greg said he could be a third down back complementary.
Which I think he'd be really good at, by the way.
Yeah, he's terrific. Yeah, he's great at catching the football. One more guy.
Did you want to mention Derrick Henry, who the Eagles are?
Oh yeah, sure, of course.
I don't have to go after Derrick Henry,
right? But just in general, where's Derrick Henry at in his career for you?
Well, the question is, how will the league see Derrick Henry? Because Derrick Henry is a volume back. That's all he is. And he obviously for a 5-year stretch, you could argue he's the best back in football. And and again, he didn't get to playoffs and Super Bowls, but his 5-year stretch was better than Terrell Davis's 4-year stretch. But I doubt that Henry is going to be seen as a Hall of Famer right now. But it was better than Davis's stretch of 4 years. Henry was ridiculous for a man that size and his ability to break long runs. But at the end of the day, he's a foundation back. He's truly a build your offense around Derrick Henry. And I just wonder, I think he's lost a little bit, not a ton. It's not like he can't play anymore, but I think he's lost a little in terms of the juice. He's still 250 pounds, so he still can, gain yards up inside. But if you sign Derrick Henry, aren't you pretty much saying that he's the starting point of our offense? Because what else is he? You can't play him on third down. He's not a receiver. So I don't know. What is he?
Yeah, other than Baltimore, I couldn't think of a team. That's. I mean, I know Greg Roman now is with the Chargers, and Harbaugh's going to want to run the football. But if you're just looking to go somewhere, it's going to start with a running game. I just couldn't think of anyone other than
I mean,
Baltimore.
could the Chargers look at Derrick Henry and think of, hey, because he's not going to get a 3 or 4 year deal at big money, but could a team like the Chargers say, okay, we'll give him a 2 year deal, as opposed to, but if Baltimore and the Chargers are not interested, for whatever reason, they make that choice. I could almost see Derrick Henry, going the road of Zeke Elliott, not signing anywhere till training camp.
And then right, and then the problem is Greg, you were saying, it's been in my thought process the last couple of months. I don't see him doing well with 10 carries. I just don't.
No, he's not that guy. He
needs to get
a
started.
volume back, so you got to build your offense around him. I mean, you got to hand the ball off to him, and maybe I'll be wrong and somebody will, sign him, and, I don't know, but I don't see the league moving in that direction where, you're just going to have one guy.
Right.
No, although some people might say, "Oh, look at the Chiefs with Pacheco," and I mean, there's so many variables. So this kind of stuff is never just so black and white. Hey, it's this way or that way. Maybe it's totally different. But the point is he doesn't do anything else besides carry the football.
One more for you, Greg. A guy that he led the NFL rushing very early last season, actually did very well before Jonathan Taylor came back. And it's Zach Moss. What are your thoughts? Do you like this guy?
Zach Moss?
Yeah.
I did coming out of college. I don't think he's been that guy in the NFL, and I know he did well, until Taylor came back. But I don't think anybody's going to sign him and say that's the guy. I think. Now, let me say this: with what we saw in Detroit this year, the way they used Montgomery and Gibbs, now you'd have to have someone like Gibbs. Could teams look at Moss and feel like he could fill that kind of role if they had someone in their mind that was like Gibbs? Perhaps. That's why all this stuff is team specific. It's scheme specific. There's no transcendent back here. And, and even if there was, our team's playing like that in the NFL now. This isn't 20, 30 years ago, where, running back. I mean, obviously Gibbs was drafted 12th and Barkley, seemingly not that long ago, was drafted second, but I don't know if teams are seeing backs like that. There's certainly no back in this draft, by the way, that's going to go in the first round.
All right, Greg, before we move on to quarterbacks, we'd probably be remiss not to at least get your seasonal evaluation of DeAndre Swift, who set a career high in rushing, but had a career low in receiving, just to show you how the Eagles offense sort of reversed itself this past year. But what were your overall thoughts?
I think Swift is, really solid back. I mean, he's, I think we all thought we might see some more juice out of him overall, with those more explosive runs. We didn't see many of those at all. But he had a really solid year. He ended up carrying the ball over 200 times, which probably for him, he's probably really proud of that. I mean, a lot of people weren't sure whether he could do something like that, given, he's not small, but he's not a big back. So, he's going to sign somewhere and he'll be a part of an offense, but I don't think he's going to sign somewhere. I guess I'd be surprised if wherever he signed, he got 230 carries again. That would probably surprise me.
What surprised us is that he didn't catch the ball much, but also, Greg,
they didn't throw it to him much.
Yeah. That's the thing, but he also was not a part, as you always say, there's an intent behind things. When you're not part of the 2-minute and 4-minute offense.
Yeah.
And then the times he was out there, his pass protection did not look very good. And I wonder if that's, something you noticed and always holds.
I did. Back. And by the way, I thought Gainwell was a really good pass protector. So, I mean, they made a decision, and then people can debate they're with him every day. We're not, but they made a decision that Gainwell was better as a receiver, and he was clearly better as a pass protector. So I think it's easy as an abstraction to say, you got to throw it to Swift. Now, can you throw it to him on 1st and 10 when he's out there? Sure, you can design plays for that, and they didn't do that. Right. But as far as being on the field in those situations, Geoff, that you mentioned, and on 3rd down, they made a decision that Gainwell was the better player. It's hard for us to debate that. They're with him every day.
Right. All right, we will move on to quarterbacks as we finish off the list here. Not a bunch, but we know the Eagles have 1 year of Marcus Mariota. We'll see what happens. Marcus made an interesting comment about how playing this year for the Eagles sort of rekindled the flame. It made it seem like he was looking for a starting job. I don't know that he's going to find that.
No. Well, I have a question before you throw out names.
Yeah.
What is your view from talking to people as to whether you want your backup quarterback to be similar to your starter or different from your starter? Because I have heard pretty good things about Tanner McKee, you know, as far as just development and all those things, but obviously he's a totally different player. So the question is, do you feel comfortable? And we don't know the answer to this. We're just kind of talking now. Do you feel comfortable saying, okay, you know, obviously it's a new system, but he's a smart kid, by the way. You know, do you feel comfortable saying we're good with him as our number two, or are you looking for a number two?
Typically, clubs that I've spoken with, they want the similar or the same type of quarterback that you have, and McKee's completely different from Hurts. So, you know, going forward here, and we know Mariota fit kind of that profile of movable guys, but in our reporting, we noted that they were going to sign Dalton. They wanted Andy Dalton last year. I mean, no, he'd scramble a little bit, but he's certainly different than Hurts. So, with Greg, to answer your question, they've certainly shown a willingness to not draft like the same exact guy. Like they'll take guys with different traits, which is not, we didn't know that, you know, a year ago.
No,
which is interesting. So
no, I'm just curious because we don't know the answer to this right now. You know,
clubs,
until
Greg, and I don't know about you guys, but clubs, from talking to him over the years, they want to run the same system if they can with their backup quarterback. Now, as we go forward here, Greg, as we get started at quarterback, it's generally a backup list. Kirk Cousins is obviously won't become the Eagles. To me, it's either Minnesota or Atlanta for him, where he could play in the similar system. But Joe Flacco is a guy, came off the couch, was incredible. And we know his playoff game was not against Houston, but he showed that he could still play, Greg. What are your thoughts on Joe Flacco at this point of his career?
Yeah, I don't think the Eagles would be interested in him. You know, I mean,
any team. I'm just talking about any team.
Yeah,
we're not
team,
talking. What did you see from him?
I mean, I thought, look, Joe is Joe. I mean, he's going to throw the ball. He's going to make great throws. He's going to make a few that, you know, you probably shouldn't make, but he's an aggressive thrower. He's, you know, he's a pocket quarterback. He's big. He's physical. Still has a really good arm. Can make any throw. Understands the NFL game in the sense that you've got to turn it loose. You know, he's not afraid to turn it loose. You know, I don't think anybody's going to sign him necessarily to be their starting quarterback, even though, given what he did last year, was really good overall. But I don't think someone would sign him as a starter. Do you guys?
No, but
no, we're talking about backups in general.
We're just talking about backups here. He definitely looks like he could still play the game at a high enough level if he had play.
Without question.
Hang in there.
Yeah, I mean, Joe's going to be able to throw like that when he's 60. He's going to look. yeah. I mean, that's just Joe. I mean, Adam, we know him. I mean, you know, he can roll off the couch and throw. I mean, he's one of those guys. Yeah.
When you watched, we'll just go to the regular season. I mean, Greg, you tell us you're watching the All 22. Had you seen him play at that level in recent years when he had to play before this run with Cleveland? I can't remember a time he played that well in a long time.
Maybe not, but I mean, I never thought Joe was as, you know, I thought Joe never played badly when he played. Like he's going to push the ball. So there's going to be some bad throws. So if he's on a bad team, don't forget he wasn't on a bad team. So if he's on a bad team, those mistakes get magnified at him. When you're on a good team, he can make a mistake and they're still in the game and he can come back and make some throws. I mean, he threw a touchdown to Njoku. It might have been against, I forget who it was against, but it was like a 21-yard touchdown. A seam ball to Njoku. That was ridiculous. I mean, it was probably one of the best throws of the year, much less, you know, the best throw for Flacco. You know, I mean, he's going to throw it.
And I feel like he's the only quarterback who's played for the Browns over the last few years who's understood that Njoku is actually a really good tight end. I mean, nobody else gets the ball to Njoku.
Yeah.
Guy was a first-round pick, athletic traits through the roof, and nobody figured out a way to get him the ball except for Joe.
And Greg, one more thing. And I know Darius Butler felt this way. I guess he still moves pretty well.
Flacco?
Yeah, he didn't sound statue.
I mean, Flacco was never obviously a runaround guy, but Flacco was never a terrible athlete. He just, you know, there's certain guys that they want to run the system and they want to be accountable to the system. And it's funny. I was talking to people about Michael Penix, not that but I mean, he didn't run much in college at all, but people were talking about him and saying, this guy's a really good athlete. And they thought, for instance, that if he ran a 40, I had people tell me if he ran a 40, he was going to run a 4.4, but he doesn't run in college, because he's very accountable to the system. Now, Flacco would never run a 4.4, obviously, but the point is that he's accountable to the system. He wants to play quarterback. He wants to drop back and throw the ball.
Right. Craig, a guy who might fit a couple of different systems and, as long as he can stay healthy, Ryan Tannehill, what is he looking like at this point in his career? Because this is a guy who could run a little bit and move around when healthy, but hasn't been able to.
And I think Ryan Tannehill can still play. Don't forget, the last couple of years, he played behind arguably the worst offensive line in the league. And he got the living crap beat out of him. And Tannehill can still throw it. He still moves well. Ryan Tannehill can still play. Now, again, I don't know if I know we're speaking about guys as backups, but
Yes.
I don't know if anybody would sign him as a starter. But Ryan, you can line up and play with Ryan Tannehill. If you can protect him, if you have an offense that has, weapons and is somewhat multidimensional, obviously you wouldn't want him to have to be the guy, and no one would sign him for that anyway. But Ryan Tannehill can still play in this league.
What was the
Pittsburgh makes so
RPO
much sense.
big part of their offense, whether when
Some.
either Arthur Smith was there or after?
Yeah. Don't forget, though, he played in an offense that was heavy, multiple tight end personnel. That's the way they play. Now, again, that's just, but I think Tannehill, I think he'd be a really good backup for Philly. I think because if you had to play him, he can play now. You're not giving away games.
Yeah, I was thinking Pittsburgh because Arthur Smith there, and they're looking for one more guy. So yeah, and yeah, he's cut the term is he's in the mix guy. Like you said, I don't know that he's going to be a starter, but he certainly could
But you
push for
can.
one.
Yeah,
I mean,
high-end backup.
Sure, sure. He
can.
actually, if he goes to Pittsburgh, he would be competing for that job.
Let me tell you something.
Atlanta.
If he were to go to Pittsburgh, it wouldn't surprise me. They want Pickett to be the guy, but it wouldn't surprise me based on off season and training camp. Tannehill could theoretically win the job.
I know it was a long time ago, but remember when the Titans made the trade for Tannehill, their hope was he'd push Mariota. Well, he wound up taking his job.
Yeah.
So
and then took him to the AFC
Keep
Championship
in mind, I know that we're now in the 2024 season coming up, and what you did a number of years ago doesn't matter theoretically. But I mean, there was a stretch there for a couple of years where that offense in Tennessee was averaging 30 points a game.
Yep. They did go to the AFC Championship game, right? They had a 17-point lead on the Chiefs.
That was 1919,
right? And they upset the 14-3 Ravens team to get there. Yeah.
They either that year led the NFL in scoring or second or third. They averaged like 31 points a game.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of high-end backup, there may be no better one than Jacoby Brissett, who is always valuable backup and can step in and win games. What do you like about? Well, what do you think? What does the tape show on Jacoby Brissett?
Because the one reason, first of all, Brissett's not a bad player. Like, you can line up and play with him in some ways, like Tannehill. But the thing about Brissett, and I've known this ever since he came out of North Carolina State, is he is just the highest quality character human being. Everybody talks about him that way. Everybody wants him in their quarterback room. Everybody wants him on their team. He's that guy. And you can play with him too. I mean, in some ways, he's like Tannehill. If you had to line up and play with Jacoby Brissett for any number of games, you can play, and he'll run your offense, and he can make throws, and he can move a little bit. But he is the highest character, quality character, and that's why people want him. They want him in their building. He's that guy.
And he would be good. Do you think he'd be good in an Eagles offense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he could be good for the most part in any offense.
Got it.
Yeah, he's plenty of starting experience, which you love. And then just one more before we get out of here. And this guy came out of nowhere because he's been a total journeyman to at least play competent football for a little bit. What are your thoughts about Josh Jacobs as a quarterback, Greg?
Yeah, and then it wore out. I mean, because obviously,
reality hit.
I mean, look, the guy's incredibly intelligent. The guy, I mean, what he did in Minnesota in that one game when he really didn't know the plays, it's remarkable. He wasn't terrible at all in Arizona. It wasn't like he couldn't play, but then it starts to wear out because he's not a great thrower of the football. He starts to make some mistakes in his decision making. Could he be your backup? Sure, he could be your backup. And theoretically, he's the same as Hurts in terms of stylistically. So, you as we were speaking about Mariota, you could say Dobbs is similar. But the longer he plays, I think it starts, there's a lot of people who believe that backups after 3 games, it starts to show.
Yeah.
That's the way a lot of, coaches feel this way. I don't mean,
Sure.
writers and, I'm talking about coaches feel that way.
Yep.
I've heard them talk about that a lot, that after 3 games, you start to get into, the reasons why he's a backup.
Yep.
There's a coaching term that says we want a guy who could get us out of a tough spot, and Josh Dobbs is that guy. But they always say the words show up after a while. That's why they're backups, and it could be any position, not just quarterback. But yeah, that's look, if you're looking for a starting quarterback in free agency, it's going to be hard to find one, typically like it is every year.
I mean, I would say to my way of thinking, I would say Tannehill is the best guy of this group if you had to line up and play him as a starter.
Right.
Because he was on such a bad team, and with an O-line that was, their O-line was horrendous.
Well, nothing exemplifies the week-to-week nature of the NFL like Josh Dobbs becoming the hero for the Vikings, and then 2 weeks later getting benched for, I think, either Nick Mullins or Jaron Hall. I don't remember.
I did a piece on Josh Dobbs in the matchup show this year.
Oh wow,
because he was playing well. Yeah.
Nice. He got his 5 minutes of fame.
Yeah.
All right. Great stuff. We have just gone through all of the offensive skill position players in free, not all of them, but a key number of them that could be of interest to the Eagles or any NFL team at wide receiver, running back, and quarterback. So that wraps up our NFL free agency preview on Intel with Greg Cosell. We still have many, many episodes left. We'll get a recap of what the Eagles and NFL teams do next week in the free agency period, that first wave of it. And then we will turn our attention to NFL draft preview. We know Greg is spending about 37 hours a day, if that's possible, looking at college prospects. About how far through your list are you?
I'm a little behind for a couple of reasons. Number one, I feel like the Super Bowl just happened yesterday.
Yeah.
And until the season ends, I can't really get in. And, it's kind of a weird counterintuitive thing. The more I learn, and I've learned so much more football over the last 2-3 years, just because I've been fortunate to have many more conversations with coaches, Zoom calls, the whole deal. That is, the more I learn, it actually takes me longer to watch tape because I see more. And then I want to see it again, so I keep, whereas if you don't know something, you just keep watching the tape and you just keep going. So now, believe it or not, Geoff, takes me longer, but I'm trying, I'm grinding,
Your gift is your curse, Greg. I
right. So
it's a one-man band.
Yeah, I'm trying.
Well, listen, we appreciate it, and we look forward to getting into the college prospects with you in a few weeks. So you get a little bit of time to go through the guys that you got to catch up on. That's going to do it for this episode of the Intel with Greg Cosell. For Adam Caplan, I'm Geoff Mosher, and the man, Greg Cosell. Will catch you all on the next one.